The night I collapsed in the rain, I thought my story was ending. I had no idea it was only introducing me to the most dangerous man I would ever trust. The rain pounded against my windshield so hard it blurred every traffic light into glowing streaks of red and gold. My hands refused to stop shaking as I tightened my grip around the steering wheel, trying to steady my breathing the way my therapist had taught me years ago. Inhale for 4. Hold for 4. Exhale for 4. It wasn't working. Nothing was working anymore. My name is Charlotte Bennett. I'm 29 years old, a registered nurse working too many shifts, and the single mother of the sweetest little 5-year-old girl in the world. Lily was spending the night with my older sister because I'd picked up another double shift at St. Matthew's Medical Center. I told everyone I needed the overtime. That wasn't entirely true. Sometimes work was easier than sitting alone with my thoughts. Sometimes exhaustion felt safer than silence. My phone buzzed again in the cup holder. I didn't have to look to know who it was. Unknown number. Third time in 10 minutes. I reached over and silenced it without reading the screen. My pulse climbed anyway. Outside, the October storm swallowed downtown Manhattan beneath sheets of cold rain. Wind shoved against my little Honda Civic every time I crossed another intersection. Wipers moved as fast as they could, but they still couldn't keep up. Everything outside looked distorted, like the city itself had melted into watercolor. I whispered to myself, "Just get home, Charlotte. Just get home." My apartment was only 12 minutes away. 12 minutes to a warm shower. 12 minutes until I could call Lily before bedtime. 12 minutes until I could pretend tomorrow might somehow be easier. Then another notification lit up my phone. This time the sound pierced straight through my chest. My fingers instantly went numb. My heartbeat slammed against my ribs so hard it hurt. Air disappeared from my lungs. Not again. Please, not again. I pulled into the nearest parking lot beside a small neighborhood grocery store, hoping the attack would pass before I drove another mile. I turned off the engine and leaned forward, pressing my forehead against the steering wheel. The familiar pressure wrapped around my chest like invisible ropes, pulling tighter with every second. My vision narrowed. My fingertips tingled. Every breath became shorter than the one before it. I knew exactly what this was. Panic attacks had become unwelcome visitors over the past 2 years. Usually I could fight through them. Usually I could remind myself that fear wasn't the same thing as danger. Tonight, my body refused to listen. Rain hammered the roof above me like thousands of impatient fingers. The sound grew louder. My heartbeat grew faster. The car suddenly felt too small, too hot, too impossible to breathe inside. I pushed the door open and stumbled into the storm, hoping the cold air would shock my body back into control. Instead, freezing rain soaked through my jacket within seconds. Water dripped into my eyes. My sneakers splashed through growing puddles as I tried to steady myself beneath the flickering light of the nearly empty parking lot. I couldn't fill my lungs. I couldn't think. Every distant headlight looked like a threat. Every passing engine sounded too close. My knees weakened. I reached for a nearby light pole, but my hand slipped against the wet metal. The ground tilted beneath me. My last clear memory was seeing a long black SUV glide silently into the parking lot, its headlights cutting through the rain like 2 pale stars. The driver's door opened. A tall man stepped out wearing a dark overcoat that barely moved in the wind. I couldn't make out his face, only the calm confidence in the way he walked toward me while everyone else drove past without slowing down. Then everything faded into darkness. Consciousness returned in fragments. First came the warmth, then the faint scent of cedarwood and fresh linen. Then the steady crackling of a fireplace somewhere beyond my closed eyes. For one impossible second, I thought I was home. I thought Lily would be curled beside me asking for pancakes shaped like little hearts. Then I opened my eyes, and every comforting thought vanished. The ceiling above me stretched at least 15 feet high, decorated with elegant crown molding that belonged in a historic mansion rather than any place I had ever visited. Soft, gray morning light filtered through floor-to-ceiling windows hidden behind heavy cream-colored curtains. I blinked several times, convinced I was still dreaming. The mattress beneath me was impossibly comfortable. The blankets felt heavier than anything I owned, wrapping around me with unfamiliar warmth. My heartbeat immediately accelerated. Where was I? I pushed myself upright too quickly, and the room spun for a moment. My clothes were gone. Panic surged through me until I realized I was wearing clean cotton pajamas several sizes too large. They were simple, modest, and obviously new. Someone had changed my soaked clothes while I had been unconscious. My stomach tightened. I climbed out of bed, my bare feet sinking into an impossibly soft rug. Every instinct screamed that I needed to leave immediately. Before I reached the bedroom door, it opened quietly from the outside. A woman in her early 60s stepped inside carrying a tray with tea, toast, and fresh fruit. Silver streaks ran through her dark hair, and her gentle smile softened the surprise in my chest. "Good morning," she said calmly. "You gave us quite a scare." I stared at her without answering. "Where am I?" My voice sounded hoarse. "You are safe," she replied. "That is the most important thing." "That is not an answer." She nodded with understanding instead of offense. "You collapsed during the storm. Mr. Moretti brought you here after the paramedics confirmed you were stable but severely exhausted." My mind immediately returned to the man stepping out of the black sport utility vehicle. Who was Mr. Moretti? Before she could answer, another voice filled the room. Low, calm, controlled. "I am." I turned toward the doorway. The man standing there looked exactly as I remembered, except daylight revealed details the rain had hidden. He was tall, broad-shouldered, and dressed in a charcoal sweater instead of the expensive overcoat he had worn the night before. Dark hair framed a composed face that revealed almost nothing. His green eyes studied me carefully, not with suspicion but with quiet attention, as though he were making certain I was fully awake. "My name is Adrian Moretti," he said. "You fainted before you could tell anyone yours." I folded my arms instinctively. "Charlotte Bennett." He gave a slight nod. "Mrs. Bennett." "Miss Bennett." I corrected automatically. "I am not married." Something flickered across his expression before disappearing just as quickly. "Miss Bennett, then." Neither of us spoke for several seconds. The silence felt strangely heavier than conversation. Finally, I asked the only question that mattered. "How long have I been here?" "Approximately 10 hours. I need my phone." Without hesitation, he reached into his pocket and placed it on the small table beside the bed. The screen had been carefully dried and fully charged. "Your battery was dead," he explained. "One of the staff replaced it." I grabbed the phone immediately. 5 missed calls from my sister Emily. 3 text messages asking where I was. Relief washed over me when I saw the last message. Lily had slept through the night. She was safe. I closed my eyes for a brief moment, whispering a silent thank you. When I looked up again, Adrian had not moved. "You are free to leave whenever you wish," he said evenly. "But before you make that decision, there is something outside this house that you should probably see." My fingers tightened around the phone until my knuckles turned white. Emily had already sent another message while I stood there. "Charlotte, please call me. Lily keeps asking when you are coming." I typed a quick reply telling her I was safe and that I would explain everything later. Before I could press the call button, Adrian spoke again. "Come with me." Every sensible instinct told me to refuse. I did not know this man. I did not know this house. Yet something about his voice carried quiet certainty instead of pressure. He was not ordering me. He was asking me to see something for myself. I slipped my phone into the pocket of the borrowed pajamas and followed him into a wide hallway lined with paintings older than anything I had ever seen outside a museum. The floors reflected the morning sunlight like polished glass. Everything about the estate whispered old money and absolute discipline. Even the staff moved with calm efficiency, greeting Adrian respectfully before returning to their work without lingering for conversation. No one stared at me. No one asked questions. Adrian stopped beside a large window overlooking the circular driveway. "Look carefully," he said. I stepped beside him and peered through the glass. At first, I saw nothing unusual beyond trimmed hedges, stone fountains, and the iron security gates nearly 200 feet away. Then I noticed the dark gray sport utility vehicle parked across the road beyond the property entrance. It looked ordinary enough, except it had not moved. "It has been there since before sunrise," Adrian said quietly. "It left twice for less than 5 minutes and returned to the exact same location." A chill crept across my shoulders despite the warmth inside the room. "It could belong to anyone." "It could," he agreed. "That is why I had my security team observe rather than interfere." He handed me a tablet displaying still images from exterior cameras. The same vehicle appeared again and again at different times during the morning, always facing the estate, always waiting. My mouth felt dry. Why would anyone be watching this place? Adrian turned his attention toward me instead of the screen. "That is the question I hoped you could answer." I shook my head immediately. I do not know anyone who would follow me. Even as the words left my mouth, doubt settled in. The unknown calls. The growing feeling that someone had been watching me during the past several weeks. The uneasy sensation that never completely disappeared whenever I walked to my apartment after work. I had convinced myself it was anxiety refusing to let go. Now I was no longer certain. Adrian seemed to notice the change in my expression. You remembered something. I looked away toward the waiting vehicle. Maybe it is nothing. Sometimes the smallest details matter the most. I swallowed hard before answering. For about a month, I have noticed the same feeling whenever I leave the hospital. I never actually saw anyone following me. I thought it was my imagination because of my panic attacks. He remained silent, allowing me to continue without interruption. Last week I found fresh flowers outside my apartment door. There was no card. Yesterday someone called my work asking strange questions about my schedule. I assumed they had the wrong number. Adrian folded his hands behind his back, his expression unreadable. Miss Bennett, I believe those events deserve to be taken seriously. I stared through the window once more. The gray vehicle was still there, perfectly still beneath the clear autumn sky. Then, almost as if the driver sensed we were watching, the engine started. Slowly, without urgency, it pulled away from the curb and disappeared around the corner. Adrian did not celebrate. He did not relax. He simply looked at me and said, "Whoever that was, they now know you are here." The rest of the morning passed in a strange silence that refused to settle my nerves. I kept expecting Adrian to lock the doors or insist that I remain inside, but he did neither. Instead, he simply asked one of the staff to prepare lunch and told me I was welcome to use the library, the garden, or the sunroom while I decided what I wanted to do next. It was not the behavior I had expected from a man surrounded by security and mystery. If anything, it made me more suspicious. I wandered through the estate with my phone clutched tightly in my hand, answering another call from Emily. I reassured her that I was safe and promised I would pick Lily up before dinner if everything went according to plan. She asked where I was. I looked around at marble columns, enormous windows, and carefully restored paintings before admitting that I honestly did not know how to explain it. After we hung up, I found myself standing in a quiet courtyard filled with late autumn flowers. The rain had washed everything clean, leaving tiny drops sparkling on white roses beneath the afternoon sun. For the first time in weeks, my breathing felt steady. Then I heard laughter. It was soft, unexpected, and unmistakably genuine. Curious, I followed the sound toward the back garden. Adrian was kneeling beside a golden retriever that looked old enough to have gray around its muzzle. The enormous dog rested its head against his shoulder, while Adrian patiently untangled a bright red tennis ball from the bushes. The sight stopped me in my tracks. This was not the intimidating man I had imagined after seeing armed security and expensive vehicles. This was someone speaking gently to an aging dog as though it were an old friend. He noticed me almost immediately, but did not seem embarrassed to be caught. Instead, he tossed the ball across the lawn. The dog chased after it with surprising enthusiasm before returning a few moments later. His name is Winston, Adrian said. He believes every afternoon belongs to him. I smiled before I realized I was doing it. He is beautiful. Winston wandered over and pressed his nose against my hand, clearly deciding that I had already been accepted. I scratched behind his ears, earning an approving sigh that made me laugh quietly. Adrian watched the interaction without saying a word. After a long moment, he asked, "Do you have pets?" I shook my head. Lily has been asking for one ever since she learned what puppies are. I keep telling her that our apartment barely has enough room for the two of us. His expression softened almost imperceptibly. Children have a way of making small places feel much larger. The comment surprised me. "You like children?" "More than most adults," he answered with complete seriousness. Before I could respond, an older employee approached carrying a tray with tea and fresh cookies. Adrian thanked him by name before placing the tray on a nearby table. There was no arrogance in the exchange, no raised voice, no expectation that everyone should fear him. The staff smiled naturally around him, the way people smiled around someone they respected rather than someone they obeyed. Every assumption I had built inside my head began to crack. I had expected coldness. I had expected control. Instead, I found patience, quiet manners, and someone who seemed more interested in making sure I had eaten than in asking questions about my life. Even so, One question continued to echo in my mind. Why would a man with a life this extraordinary stop his car for a frightened stranger in the middle of a storm? As though he had somehow heard the thought without my speaking it aloud, Adrian looked toward the fading sunlight and said very quietly, "Sometimes helping one person changes more lives than we ever expect." That evening the sky turned the soft shade of amber that only appeared after a hard storm. And for the first time in what felt like forever, I sat on a quiet terrace without checking over my shoulder every few seconds. A warm cup of chamomile tea rested between my hands, its gentle steam drifting into the cool autumn air. Adrian joined me a few minutes later, carrying nothing except a simple black notebook that he never opened. Neither of us spoke immediately. The silence was strangely comfortable, broken only by the distant sound of water flowing through the garden fountain and Winston's occasional bark somewhere across the lawn. I found myself speaking before I had fully decided to trust him. "You asked earlier if I remembered anything." Adrian looked toward me, but did not interrupt. "The truth is that I have been afraid for a long time." Saying the words out loud felt heavier than I expected. Not because of one person. Not anymore. Just afraid. I stared into my untouched tea as memories surfaced one after another. When Lily was a baby, I believed life would become easier if I just worked harder. I picked up extra shifts. I smiled through every difficult day. I kept telling myself tomorrow would be different. My voice grew quieter. Instead, every month became another lesson in surviving. Adrian remained completely still, allowing me to continue at my own pace. There was something comforting about the way he listened. He never rushed to fill the silence with advice or easy promises. Eventually, I left the marriage because I realized Lily deserved to grow up in a peaceful home. I chose my words carefully. The separation itself was difficult, but rebuilding our lives afterward was even harder. Every unexpected phone call made my heart race. Every unfamiliar car outside our apartment made me wonder if someone was waiting. My doctor called it anxiety. Later, another specialist explained that repeated stress had turned into panic attacks. I managed a tired smile that disappeared almost immediately. The embarrassing part is that I know exactly what is happening every time one begins. I can explain the science behind it. I can even teach breathing exercises to patients at the hospital. But when it happens to me, none of that knowledge seems to matter. Adrian finally spoke, his voice calm and steady. "There is nothing embarrassing about surviving more than your mind was ever supposed to carry." His words caught me off guard. There was no pity in them, only quiet understanding. "Most people think strength means never falling apart," he continued. "I have learned that real strength is choosing to stand again after every difficult day." I looked at him for a long moment, wondering how a man whose life appeared so controlled could speak with such certainty about broken people. Before I could ask, one of the house staff approached respectfully with Adrian's phone. He glanced at the screen, thanked the employee, and placed the phone back into his pocket without answering. Whatever message had arrived, it could wait. Instead, he turned his full attention back to me. "Charlotte," he said softly, speaking my first name for the first time, "you have spent years protecting everyone else. When was the last time someone protected you?" The question settled deep inside me because I could not remember the answer. I searched through years of exhausting shifts, overdue bills, sleepless nights, and constant worry, but every memory looked the same. I had always been the one carrying everything alone. As the last light faded beyond the trees, I realized something even more unsettling. During the entire afternoon inside Adrian Moretti's estate, my breathing had remained calm. It was the first day in almost 2 years that fear had not completely controlled my heart. The next morning, I finally decided it was time to leave. Emily had agreed to keep Lily one more night after hearing the exhaustion in my voice, but I could not continue accepting the kindness of a man I barely knew, no matter how grateful I felt. I packed the borrowed pajamas into a neatly folded stack on the bed, changed back into my freshly cleaned clothes, and walked downstairs carrying my small purse. Adrian was already standing near the front entrance, speaking quietly with one of his employees. The conversation ended the moment he saw me. "You are feeling better," he said. "Much better," I replied. "Thank you for everything, but I should go home." He nodded without argument. "I expected you would say that." His calm response caught me by surprise. Part of me had expected another warning or another request that I remain inside. Instead, he picked up a set of car keys from the entry table. "I will have someone drive you." That is not necessary. Perhaps not, he answered. But it is something I would prefer. Before I could continue the discussion, another member of the household approached carrying a tablet. Adrian glanced at the screen, and for the first time since I had met him, I noticed the smallest change in his expression. His jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. Nothing dramatic. Just enough for me to recognize that something had interrupted the quiet rhythm of the morning. He thanked the employee, handed back the tablet, and turned toward me. There has been a small change of plans. My stomach tightened immediately. What happened? Your sister called the front gate a few minutes ago. I blinked in confusion. Emily does not even know where I am. She did not call looking for you here. She called the number you used to contact her yesterday. One of my staff answered because your phone had been left charging in the sitting room. My heart skipped. Is Lily all right? She is safe? Adrian said immediately. Your sister received an unexpected visitor this morning. Every muscle in my body became rigid. Who? She did not recognize the individual. According to her, someone politely asked whether you had already returned home from the hospital. I stared at him, unable to speak. Emily had never mentioned where Lily was staying to anyone. She was careful about that. Always careful. Adrian continued in the same steady voice. The visitor left after a brief conversation and caused no disturbance, but your sister felt uncomfortable enough to contact you. I reached for my phone with trembling fingers and immediately called Emily. She answered on the first ring. Charlotte, I did not want to scare you, she said, but something felt wrong. The man was polite. Too polite. He smiled the whole time, but he kept looking toward the apartment building like he expected someone else to come outside. Did Lily see him? I asked quickly. No. I made sure she stayed inside with cartoons. Relief flooded through me, followed almost instantly by another wave of fear. After we ended the call, I lowered the phone slowly. I do not understand, I whispered. Neither do I, Adrian admitted. But I believe the events are connected. I looked through the tall glass doors toward the long driveway beyond the gates. Yesterday, I believed my fears were simply the lingering shadows of old anxiety. Today those shadows had names, faces, and unanswered questions. Adrian stepped beside me, his voice remaining calm enough to steady my racing thoughts. Until we understand why someone is searching for you, I would prefer that you and Lily are not alone. For the first time since walking into his home, I did not hear those words as control. I heard them as protection, and that frightened me far more than anything else, because a part of me was beginning to believe he might be right. I agreed to stay one more day, telling myself it was only until we understood who had been asking questions about me. That explanation sounded reasonable every time I repeated it in my head, yet deep down I knew there was another reason. For the first time in years, I did not feel like I had to carry every burden alone. Early the next afternoon, Adrian offered to drive me to Emily's apartment so I could bring Lily back safely. I expected a convoy of intimidating vehicles, but instead we left in a simple black luxury sedan with only one security vehicle following several car lengths behind. The drive across Manhattan was quiet. Autumn sunlight reflected off the Hudson River, and people filled the sidewalks as though life had never contained fear at all. I watched families pushing strollers, children laughing outside a bakery, and office workers hurrying toward the subway. It looked like an ordinary afternoon, yet my heart still raced whenever I noticed a car lingering too long behind us. Adrian noticed without asking. Look ahead, he said gently. Not behind you. I frowned. Why? Because fear convinces us the danger is always following. Sometimes it causes us to miss the people standing beside us. His words stayed with me the rest of the drive. Emily opened the apartment door before I even reached it. She hugged me so tightly that neither of us spoke for several seconds. Then Lily came running down the hallway wearing her favorite yellow sweater with tiny embroidered daisies across the front. Mommy, she shouted before throwing both arms around my waist. I knelt and held her as if letting go would somehow make the past 2 days disappear. I missed you more than pancakes, she whispered into my shoulder, which was Lily's highest possible measurement of love. I laughed through unexpected tears. That is a very serious amount. Only then did she notice Adrian standing a respectful distance away. She tilted her head with the fearless curiosity that only small children possessed. Is he your friend? She asked. I hesitated, unsure how to answer. Adrian solved the problem himself. He crouched until they were almost the same height and smiled politely. My name is Adrian. Lily studied him for several thoughtful seconds before extending her tiny hand exactly the way Emily had taught her. I am Lily. Mommy says good manners matter. Adrian shook her hand with complete seriousness. Your mother is absolutely right. Lily looked at Winston's dog hair, still clinging to the sleeve of my jacket. You have a puppy? She asked excitedly. Adrian nodded. A very old dog who believes tennis balls are the greatest invention in history. Her eyes widened. Can I meet him someday? If your mother agrees, he answered. Not if I agreed. If your mother agreed. That single sentence told me more about his character than hours of conversation ever could. He respected boundaries, even with a 5-year-old child. While Emily prepared coffee in the kitchen, I quietly told Adrian I would only need a few minutes to gather Lily's things. Instead of following us inside, he remained near the doorway, giving our family privacy without being asked. As I packed Lily's backpack with pajamas, coloring books, and her favorite stuffed rabbit, Emily leaned closer and whispered, Charlotte, I do not know who this man really is, but Lily has smiled more in the last 2 minutes than she is all week. I looked toward the hallway where Adrian was patiently listening to Lily explain the rules of an imaginary tea party with complete attention. For the first time since this impossible journey had begun, I realized the most powerful thing about Adrian Moretti was not the people who protected him. It was the quiet way he made everyone around him feel protected. By the time we returned to Adrian's estate that evening, Lily had already decided Winston was her new best friend. The old golden retriever followed her across the lawn with slow, patient steps while she narrated an elaborate adventure involving imaginary castles, brave squirrels, and a queen who served chocolate chip cookies instead of royal decrees. I watched from the terrace with a cup of tea in my hands, surprised by how naturally laughter filled a place I had once associated with mystery and fear. Adrian stood beside me in comfortable silence, his eyes following Lily with the quiet attention of someone protecting something precious without making it obvious. She trusts people very carefully, I said softly. Children usually do, he replied. They notice character long before adults stop arguing with their instincts. His answer lingered in my mind as the afternoon slowly faded into evening. After Lily had fallen asleep in one of the guest rooms, wrapped around her stuffed rabbit as though the world contained no danger at all, Adrian asked whether I would join him for coffee in the library. The room smelled of leather, polished oak, and old books. Rain tapped gently against the tall windows again, though this storm was far quieter than the one that had changed everything. Adrian stood beside the fireplace for several moments before speaking. There is something I should have told you sooner. I looked up from my cup, immediately sensing the weight behind his voice. What is it? He rested one hand against the mantel and exhaled slowly. The night I found you was not the first time I had seen you. I frowned in confusion. We have met before. Not formally. He shook his head. About 6 months ago, I visited St. Matthew's Medical Center. My mind searched frantically through countless overnight shifts, crowded hallways, and endless patients. Nothing surfaced. Adrian continued quietly. One of my employees had collapsed at work from exhaustion. He refused to remain in the hospital because he was worried about losing his job. Most people walked past him after he was discharged. His eyes settled on the fire instead of me. You did not. A faint memory stirred somewhere deep inside me. A tired middle-aged man sitting alone in the waiting area with no coat during an unusually cold evening. I remember him, I whispered. He looked frightened. Adrian nodded once. You bought him dinner from the cafeteria with your own money. Then you sat beside him until his daughter arrived. I stared at him in disbelief. That was nothing. To him it was everything. Adrian finally looked directly at me. He spoke about your kindness for weeks afterward. My throat tightened. I had completely forgotten that small moment because it had never felt extraordinary. It was simply the right thing to do. Adrian gave a faint smile that barely reached his eyes. When I saw you collapse in the rain, I recognized you immediately. You remembered me after all that time? Some people are difficult to forget, he answered honestly, especially those who choose compassion when nobody is watching. The room fell silent once more, but this silence felt different. It carried understanding instead of uncertainty. I lowered my eyes, overwhelmed by the realization that the smallest act of kindness could travel farther than anyone imagined. Adrian walked toward the window, watching raindrops slide across the glass. Without turning back, he spoke one final sentence that settled deep inside my heart. Charlotte, That night, I did not stop because you were in danger. I stopped because I already knew exactly what kind of person you were, and I could not drive past someone who had spent her life saving everyone else. 1 year later, the first autumn rain arrived just before sunrise. I stood outside the large windows of a small counseling clinic on the Upper West Side, watching tiny drops gather on the glass exactly the way they had the night my life changed forever. Only this time, the sound of rain no longer made my chest tighten. It reminded me how far I had come. The sign above the entrance read Bennett Family Wellness Center. It was modest compared to the grand buildings surrounding it, but every room inside had been created with one purpose: giving people a place to breathe again. Children colored pictures in the waiting room, while parents drank coffee without feeling rushed. Veterans sat beside college students. Nurses sat beside teachers. No one was judged for carrying invisible burdens. Every Friday afternoon, I volunteered 1 extra hour for families who could not afford therapy because I remembered exactly what it felt like to believe that healing belonged only to people with money. Lily burst through my office door wearing a bright blue raincoat and rain boots covered with tiny yellow stars. "Mommy," she announced proudly. I counted 12 puddles outside. I laughed and knelt to straighten her hood. "Did you jump in every single one?" She gave me a mischievous smile that answered the question before she spoke. "Maybe." Before I could tease her any further, the front door opened again. Adrian stepped inside carrying Winston's leash in one hand and a paper bag from our favorite neighborhood bakery in the other. Winston, older and slower than ever, walked directly toward Lily, who immediately wrapped both arms around his neck. Adrian looked at me with the same quiet smile that had become my favorite part of every morning. Nothing about him had changed the things that mattered most. He still thanked every employee by name. He still listened more than he spoke. He still believed that kindness was never a weakness. The only difference was that he no longer carried every responsibility by himself. We had learned that lesson together. "Fresh cinnamon rolls," he said, setting the warm bag on the reception desk. I was informed by a very reliable 6-year-old that Fridays require celebration. Lily raised her hand proudly. "That was me." "I had already guessed," he replied. Emily appeared from one of the counseling rooms with a smile that told me she had noticed the exchange before either of us had. The clinic had become a family project in ways none of us could have imagined. My sister handled administration. Adrian quietly funded scholarships for patients who needed long-term care, but insisted his name never appear on any plaque or brochure. He always said that helping people should never become a performance. As patients slowly left for the afternoon, the rain outside softened into a gentle mist. Lily reached for both of our hands without saying a word. We stepped outside together, Winston trotting patiently beside us. Cars moved slowly along the wet streets while umbrellas bloomed like colorful flowers across the sidewalks. A year earlier, I would have hurried through the rain, desperate to escape it. Instead, I lifted my face toward the cool air and smiled. Adrian noticed. "What are you thinking?" he asked quietly. I looked at the clouds, then at the little girl laughing as she splashed through another puddle. I used to believe that rain only arrived to remind me of everything I had survived, I said. Now it reminds me that every storm eventually leaves enough light for someone to find the way home. Adrian gently squeezed my hand, and together we followed Lily down the sidewalk while the city moved around us. The night I collapsed, I believed I had lost control of my life. Looking back, I finally understood the truth. Sometimes the road that feels like the end is simply the place where hope quietly decides to begin again.